0 by Representative Canario. And let us next take up our two drone bills. House Bill 5453 by Representative Gallison and House Bill 5454 by Representative Filippi. Representative Filippi, would you like to tell us about your bill?
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This bill requires police obtain a warrant prior to using an unmanned aerial aircraft, also known as a drone. And this is a question of values. Over the past 14 years, individual privacy, which has been a bedrock of the American experience, has been and is being undermined in the name of national security and criminal justice expediency. United States Senator Ron Wyden has stated that the American people would be absolutely stunned if they knew what kind of surveillance has been authorized by the President's secret Patriot Act interpretation. Moreover, the revelations by Edward Snowden concerning the NSA's mass collection of domestic electronic data is a significant cause for concern. History tells us that technology developed to fight our enemies abroad is eventually brought home. And this is what we see with the federal government's surveillance apparatus, and we see it with our local law enforcement's desire to acquire some of these technologies. And I just want to state that we have the utmost respect for our law enforcement, and we have that admiration precisely because they uphold our rights while doing an incredibly difficult job. Last month, we had a hearing on a bill to require police warrants before our present and past cell phone geolocation data is obtained by police. The Attorney General opposed this bill, in effect asserting that the government should be able to find out where you are and where you were without obtaining a warrant, because geolocation data is a business record held by a third party. And this is a scary proposition. As we deal with the issues of drones, it is crucial that we acknowledge the likelihood that they will soon become a standard law enforcement tool. If you told me 10 years ago that we would be fighting our wars from computer screens halfway around the world, I would not have imagined it. But yet, that's where we are today. And this technology is likely to come home and be used by local law enforcement. Indeed, the 2013 FAA Reauthorization Act opened up U.S. airspace to commercial and government use of drones. And the FAA estimates that there will be 30,000 drones in U.S. airspace by 2020, many of these belonging to government agencies. Critically, our United States Supreme Court has held that we do not have a reasonable expectation of privacy in the airspace above our homes, thus negating a warrant requirement prior to police may use a helicopter above your home, and that would likely be applied to police use of drones. In effect, the Supreme Court has put this issue before the legislatures to deal with, and deal with it we must. Recognizing this and getting in front of this issue, 9 states have already enacted laws requiring a warrant prior to police drone use. Oregon, Idaho, Utah, Texas, Illinois, Indiana, Tennessee, Virginia, and Florida require warrants prior to police use of drones with some limited exceptions. Now, while this bill does not provide any exemptions to the warrant requirement, it is intended as a start to this necessary conversation. And I'm happy to hear from the Attorney General's office and interested parties concerning what reasonable exceptions they need, such as exigent circumstances and large event monitoring. And I'm happy to work with all interested parties and the committee to craft a sub-A which is most satisfactory to all interested parties. This is a necessary conversation. It is a question of values we hold as Americans and hold dear as a society. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I look forward to working with all parties to craft a sub-A that satisfies everyone. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Any questions for Representative Filippi? Okay, could we hear from Brian Sullivan from the Rhode Island Police Chiefs Association and Tony Capezza from the International Brotherhood of Police Officers, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Brian Sullivan. I represent the Rhode Island Police Chiefs Association, and I was glad to hear I want to say Blake, but I want to say Representative Filippi's discussion about working to change this. The Chiefs Association is concerned with privacy as well, but we're also concerned with the exceptions. Some of those exceptions that we are concerned with are search and rescue, incidents where there may be an active shooter or a barricaded subject where we could gain information for officer safety, incidents where there may be a disaster and we're using that type of equipment to gather information. So those are some of the exceptions that we are looking to have crafted into the bill as we move ahead with this discussion.
Thank you, Chief. Any questions? Thank you, and thank you for your patience this evening.
Thanks, Chief.
Tony?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, honorable members of the committee. Tony Capezza, State Director of the International Brotherhood of Police Officers. I'll be brief because I was happy to hear that the representative would like to talk to all parties that are involved in this. So I'll just mention some of our concerns that we have right now. Some of the concerns as written right now would be that this bill actually puts the police at a disadvantage over criminals. The police would be governed where they would have to get search warrants for almost everything they did. In particular, I was referring to on page 2, line 2, observing persons, places, or things. That would be almost every surveillance. Currently, as you know, there is no expectation of privacy when you're on the street. Many times, police departments, detective units would employ surveillance constantly. This would be exactly the same as sitting in a police car, except doing it from above. This also could create a safety issue for police. Okay, there is no regulation, again, for the criminals. Therefore, there would be no regulation against them using a drone to spy on the police. They would know the movements of the police when the police had a surveillance set up, or, for that matter, a raid that was about to go down. This would put the police at a great disadvantage. And by being at that disadvantage, could cause serious injury, if not death, to the police officers involved in that raid. I've got a host of other things, but if the representative is willing to talk about them, I don't think I have to go through them now. So I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Okay, you and Representative Filippi will get together at some time in the future. Good. Any questions for Tony? Thank you, Tony.
Thank you.
Could we hear from, how about if we do Hillary Davis from the ACLU and Joey Lindbeck from the Attorney General's office? Who sat down first? Okay, Hillary, you're up.
Thank you once again, Chairman and members of the committee. Are we testifying on both drone bills simultaneously, Chairman?
Yes, the two drone bills.
On behalf of the ACLU, I am here in support of these bills. We certainly believe that Representative Gallison's bill is a part of a larger conversation that should happen. We are hesitant to do that in a piecemeal approach, dealing with very small portions of drone legislation at a time, and feel in terms of individual regulation of drones, that's something we need to look at a little bit more comprehensively, and we do have some concerns with the language that's in Representative Gallison's bill, but are certainly happy to work with him on larger drone legislation. However, undermining my note I just said about not taking things to a piecemeal approach, I think it is absolutely critical that Rhode Island put into place a warrant requirement and law enforcement restrictions on the use of drones prior to doing a more comprehensive drone bill. Law enforcement can use drones in a very different way than individuals can use them, which is to say that law enforcement has the ability of the state behind them to detain you, to use that information against you in ways that individuals cannot. We believe that a number of the current laws that are on the books may cover a lot of the issues related to drones and individual use, but there is nothing on the books currently that talks about drones and law enforcement. You've heard that drones are very similar to observing somebody out of a police car, and I would submit that that's really just not true. Drones are much more sophisticated, they are much higher technology, and they allow for significantly more surveillance than an individual in a car would do, and so that there needs to be a higher level of restriction on them and a higher standard on law enforcement. And so we are in support of Representative Filippi's bill. We do have a few language concerns, some strengthening that we would like to see, and we're very happy to work with you on that. We are open to the kind of exemptions that were just discussed. We certainly understand the point of a exigent circumstances exemption and the like, and we look forward to working with the representative and others at the table to see drone legislation crafted this year. As clarification, it is now 14 states that have drone legislation in terms of law enforcement. Rhode Island is very quickly slipping behind, and we hope that we catch up soon.
Okay, thank you, Hillary. Any questions? Joey.
The whole issue should be studied. I know what Hillary's saying about the Gallison bill, and that needs to be studied in a bigger bill, and we should bring out the Filippi bill for law enforcement purposes right now because there is a greater standard. But we do have a standard. It's called the United States Constitution and the Rhode Island Constitution. Under the Fourth Amendment, you are protected from unreasonable invasions of your expectation of privacy. So we think that the whole issue as a whole needs to be studied because we do have protections because that will be brought up in front of the judiciary. However, there's no doubt that law enforcement needs to have a greater look at taking into them. But we need to look at the same time of the private citizen, i.e. the domestic stalker stalking his victim, or the murderers, the sex offender tracking children. These are also people that can use drones to a disadvantage. So I think that if we go piece by piece by piece, we're going to miss something, and I don't think that provides for the safety of any of us, and I don't think that's what any of us want to do either. One thing that we have spoken about a couple times, requiring a search warrant, there might not be always probable cause of what you're trying to do. If you are trying to do a search and rescue, you are trying to travel a traffic accident, you're not going to have probable cause that a crime is occurring in order to get the search warrant. There's no crime. So that would be left out, and it is why we have warrant exceptions. And then finally, there is a statutory exclusionary along this bill which would say any information received not with a warrant, i.e. the traffic accident where we see a robbery taking place around the traffic accident, that can come in. It would be per se inadmissible due to the statutory exclusionary rule. Currently, that's a pretrial motion regarding the admissibility of the evidence in a Fourth Amendment context, and we think that needs to stay that way.
Thank you. Any questions for Joey? Representative Filippi.
Hey, Joey, thank you. Would you agree that the Fourth Amendment right to privacy and the privacy recognized in our fundamental rights in the Rhode Island Constitution protects people from government, not government from people?
I would to a level, yes.
And would you agree that those protections are the absolute bare minimum protections?
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Representative Joey? Okay. All right. Could we hear from, why don't we do Todd Sandhall and Michael Pugnana?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, and thank you, Representative Filippi, for submitting this bill, which the Rhode Island Tea Party adamantly supports. I just have three really quick points that I want to make, and that is that the average Rhode Islander would be very surprised at what the judiciary has already found to be acceptable searches on private property. Not necessarily in this state, but the case law is there, and I think that it's important to make light of it. I believe Representative Filippi referred to one particular one where a helicopter flying at an altitude of 400 feet was found not to be violating privacy rights by photographing through a missing panel in a covered shed. This case was Florida versus Riley, and that finding came out of the United States Supreme Court. Another one out of Wisconsin found that the warrantless placement of hidden cameras on private property was constitutional. The defendants, they were growing pot. They certainly were committing a crime, no two ways about it. However, there's an expectation of privacy which the court didn't agree they had. I think that the average Rhode Islander would be floored by this. And then the last one I want to mention is that let's see, U.S. versus Knotts, has found that unmanned surveillance is a legal replacement for a manned stakeout. In other words, they can drop a camera in or drop it on the ground, put it in a tree, and walk away, and that's acceptable, even if it's on private property, using that earlier case that I had mentioned. So certainly applying these older technologies to drone deployments in modern times would certainly leave for some serious liberty interests that I think that we need to defend against, and requiring law enforcement to obtain a warrant before using that type of technology is certainly a reasonable restraint. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, Todd. And I agree. If people had gone to law school and read some of those cases, I think I was surprised when I went to law school and read some of those cases. Michael.
Thank you, Chairman Keeble. You know, when Thomas Jefferson was writing his document in those hot early summer days of 1776, his original phrase was not life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. His original phrase was life, liberty, and property. The Founding Fathers certainly understood just how critical the sanctity of property was. And to go in with that is the basic concept that we have a right to privacy on our property. The Fourth Amendment clarifies that in no uncertain terms. Section 6 of the Rhode Island Constitution, Article 1, clarifies that. There is no ambiguity there. And the basic point that I really need to stress here is we constantly cite, from both sides of the argument, court rulings appellate court rulings, circuit court rulings, Supreme Court rulings, Superior Court. We got more courts than I can count. Well, we cannot, if we're going to remain a free society, continually rely on courts to bail us out of being negligent in taking the appropriate action to stand up for these fundamental principles that make us a free society. The right to privacy is a fundamental aspect of it. And if we're going to sit back and say, well, we can wait for the courts to decide this, then you know what? We deserve what we get, as my colleague has just stated. Unfortunately, it's a sad situation. Chairman Keeble, you mentioned when you were studying law, you were shocked at some of the case law you have. Representative Filippi, you've been equally horrified. Everybody who's studied law has been absolutely flabbergasted and dumbfounded at some of the rulings. We do not have the luxury, if we're going to remain a truly free society, of relying on the courts to bail us out of our own negligence and foolishness. We have to take the steps ourselves as a society and as our most important branch of government, which is our legislative branch, which is our representatives, for us to work together and take these proper steps. Obviously, the concerns about exigent and emergency circumstances, which are completely valid, which are raised by our law enforcement and our judicial system professionals, are valid. They need to be addressed. They can easily be addressed and have clauses put in there which still maintain appropriately the sanctity of our privacy, which must, beyond all other concerns, I don't care if it's chasing criminals, I don't care if it's trying to rescue people who've gotten lost, to maintain our status as a truly free society, we must always respect the right to privacy. Technology has far outstripped, in many cases, what our laws are dealing with, and we need to catch up, and we need to do it now. And I would urge this committee to pass Representative Filippi's bill, albeit if there are going to be some amendments to it, great, that's why God invented sub-As. But we need to take this step, because otherwise we place our fundamental nature as a free Rhode Island society in mortal peril. Once you lose the rights, try to get it back. We have to take the steps now. and not rely on judges to bail us out. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you, gentlemen. Could we hear from Randall Rose, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. With your permission, I'd like to speak to both bills. Please. Thank you. So let me start with the first bill by Representative Gallison, Bill 5453. So I'm representing the Rhode Island Coalition to Defend Human and Civil Rights. We have been supporting bills to regulate drones for a long time. And this bill does try to regulate drones. Unfortunately, we are opposed to this bill in its current form, and we are willing to work with the sponsor. The bill, there are some problems with the way the bill is written. It's designed to ban using a drone to look into an occupied building, but that's written too vaguely. It's not very clear about whether the person has to have an intent to look into the building or not. If it doesn't cover getting images without intent to look into the building, it's not clear about what's done with those images. It doesn't regulate them. It also only covers visual images and not the other kinds of images that drones can capture, such as infrared and so on. Unfortunately, it's in this area, people who have not studied the drone issue may not realize how complex it is. There are some legitimate uses for drones, as has been said in previous hearings, these bills do have to be crafted carefully, and we definitely are willing to work with both the sponsors on these bills. The bill 5453 actually has this rule on looking into buildings, which is vague, but it also preempts any legislation at the city and town level. It says that the state of Rhode Island has exclusive authority to legislate, so it not only is, we think, less than optimally drafted, it prevents cities and towns from making a better bill. And that's the worst possible situation from our point of view. Actually, drones are the kind of issue where it's important to have locally adaptable bills, because, for example, a rural area might have more legitimate uses of drones for search and rescue, for crop surveillance. You're not going to use a drone in the city of Providence for crop surveillance, but you might use it in a more rural area. We definitely oppose the bill because it preempts better bills from being written, and we also think that the bill is too heavy-handed as it stands. It says that this vaguely defined use of a drone to invade privacy is a 3-year felony, that is a far tougher penalty than any other state has at the moment. So we don't think it should be a 3-year penalty for such a vaguely defined crime. One last thing that the 5453 doesn't address, which is very important to address, is that it criminalizes the original capture of the data, but it never does anything to kind of prevent the data from being shared too much. And that's a very important issue. With these kind of electronic captures of images, it is good to try to prevent the images captured without a person's consent from being shared too much. And this committee heard that kind of bill a couple weeks ago. One good thing about drones is with drones, you have a unique opportunity to keep data from being shared when it's taken without the person's consent, because drones are almost always sold by a commercial company, and the company has that sells the drones has a software platform for capturing images and for selling images. So if you regulate the way drones are used, you can actually regulate the company that owns the drones and prevent that company from transferring on the images and data that is collected from the drones when that data was collected illicitly. So with drones, unlike other kinds of illicitly collected electronic images, you can actually prevent by law this information from being disseminated further in a way that's fairly effective. And I think that's an important thing to do, and especially given some of the other laws we've been working on in Rhode Island recently. So we're opposed to this bill, unfortunately, because it might preempt other bills at the local level that could be better. We do support Representative Filippi's bill, 5454. And we are willing to work with Representative Filippi on this. We certainly would have things that we would suggest adding to it. We think it's important, for instance, to ban weaponized drones in the state of Rhode Island. In fact, even an association of police chiefs has recommended that local law enforcement should not use weaponized drones, and we agree with that. So we think that should be in a bill. We do also agree that there should be exceptions. So, for example, all of the exceptions that Chief Sullivan recommended are things that we could totally agree with. We think those are totally fair, and even perhaps some other exceptions, such as crop surveillance or most kinds of research. So we would be very glad to put in exceptions. In fact, we think that makes the bill stronger, but we do want to more clearly define what kinds of things are invasions of privacy, because we think that's where you should draw the line. We would also suggest some other modifications, such as making the warrants more individualized, minimizing the use of drones, giving more transparency to report on the use of drones, because even though this bill does include enforcement clauses, you can't trigger the enforcement clauses if you don't know that the drone has been gathering information on you, because these drones are usually not detectable by the naked eye. So there should be reporting requirements as well, and there should be public notice, such as a hearing, before law enforcement acquires the drones. So those are our basic concerns about the drones, but we think this bill is a good start. We could live with it as it is now, but we think that that there are definitely improvements that we could make, and we'd like to continue participating in discussions on this.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Randy? Thank you. On House Bill 5454 by Representative Filippi, Al Betancourt, on behalf of the Rhode Island Farm Bureau, provided written testimony in support of that bill, and that will conclude testimony on Representative Filippi's bill, House Bill 5454. Can we hear from Andrew Argino?